All right, so my presentation is on 3D printing medical supplies for long duration space missions, which I'm working for a company called 3D4MD. The logo is up there and down here somehow. It's actually pretty cool, but I like when it's together. Essentially what we do is, or essentially what we've been doing is working on utilizing 3D printing technology for primarily medical supplies and medical, uses. And what I'm doing as, a physics undergrad is I've been looking at ways to apply our understanding of the conditions in space to our understanding of our conditions on Earth and how we can test printing medical supplies here on Earth that we can then move onto the next stage in printing on, the International Space Station or wherever we might be able to test them in different conditions. So I guess just before I go any further, I just to talk a little bit about the inspiration for this project. As we kind of venture off into different ambitious as we start taking on more ambitious projects like going to the moon again or going to Mars, we have to prepare for the eventuality that we will need to service our astronauts medically in space. That being said, the full range of medical supplies that we could bring is just going to add to the mass that we need to carry with us as we travel. And as everybody in here knows, the more mass that we take, the more fuel that we need, and it becomes a hassle. But taking a limited amount of raw material and a 3D printer will allow us to cut down on our mass and be able to print what we need when we need it. That being said, our studies on the feasibility of using 3D printers in space allows us to then apply our research back here on Earth and see what are the remote conditions and areas on Earth we can use 3D printing technology to help our medical standing, etc. So I actually remember the scene very distinctly from when I was a kid. It's I don't know if anybody here watches Star Trek, but it's a scene. Can I play it? Oh no, I can't. I guess. All right. Normally, it would be a scene where Picard goes into the replicator, and the replicator is essentially a very futuristic 3D printer, and he asks for tea Earl Grey, and he does this very frequently in the series, and he never actually gets what he wants, which I've always found kind of funny because as a scientist and a dreamer, and for many of us, Star Trek and shows like Star Trek are kind of a big part of our inspiration, as is for the company that I work for. A lot of us are huge Trekkies, and the replicator is what we really look at when we think how are we going to utilize 3D printers in space on the International Space Station and for long duration trips, and how can we best maximize the efficiency of this technology. So what we're doing, and this is going to be a little bit into what we're doing in general as well as our methods for this experiment. So what we're doing is using ABS, which is acrylonitrile butene styrene ABS thermoplastics, which are it's a raw material that is not very volatile as far as our studies go on the International Space Station, but it is primarily used in this experiment because it was the most readily available material for us to use here on Earth. That being said, as we go further onto further experiments, we're going to need to adjust our pool of, or our range of materials. Just keep in mind sterilization, combustibility, and volatility in the conditions of space. It varies greatly. It varies greatly depending on how far we are from low Earth orbit and how exposed we are to radiation and other conditions. So here we're printing out different surgical tools. For anybody who's not familiar, there's a scalpel handle, a towel holder, a curved hemostat, that's the curved one over there, a right angle clamp, which is the one that has a right angle, a tissue clamp, a straight hemostat, a sponge clamp, it holds sponges, and a ton of other things. It's not terribly important what we're printing out, but what we're essentially doing here is we used stainless steel commercially available surgical tools, and we modeled them using MRI-safe scanners, and we use SolidWorks and 3D printing and other 3D printing software to design our own surgical tools that are both very light, are cost efficient, and I won't say hollow, but they very efficiently use the material that we're given. That way we don't have to take as much up into space. We're just thinking long term. We designed, of course, the instruments that I've gone through, DeBakey tissue forceps and Alice tissue clamps. And we use the solid black ABS plastics. That's the thermoplastic that I was discussing before. And we use those plastics to print out a wide range of different surgical tools for our experiment. We use a Dimension Elite 3D printer, which is an FDM printer, fused deposition. It's kind of it's an additive manufacturing printer that uses, it heats up the material and then it adds them very simply through the X and Y axis before going down to the Z axis and just makes it a 3D image. We tested our material, so as soon as we had our surgical devices, we tested them using a 3-point bending test, which, if anybody's familiar with engineering, is a very common test for material testing and, of course, civil engineering as well. The basic principles of it is that we attach the device at 3 critical points of failure, and we just hammer it in as hard as possible. We use an MSG and a 13,000 Newton load to essentially test the devices till failure, so we just kept pushing them until they broke, which they did several times. And we collected data based on how long they lasted, how much pressure they can withstand, and how, I guess, volatile they were, like when they snapped, how explosive they were, because they are plastics and they do kind of go all over the place. After that, we wanted to collect qualitative data. So what's very important is that we do send up a lot of actual doctors into space. We actually have sent up, I think, about 46 medical doctors, both on, I guess, the Space Shuttle and International Space Station. So we didn't want to give the doctors tools that they could utilize and feel good using, because surgeons do have very kind of intimate relationship kind of with the tools that they use and how they use it. It's kind of an extension of themselves. So we collected 13 board certified surgeons and we gave them these tools as well as the commercial tools that we used previously, the stainless steel ones. And we got them to do various tasks, prepping, incisions, suturing, and other very common surgical tasks that may occur on the International Space Station or anywhere else on the long duration space missions. And we timed their timed their tasks to see how long it takes them to do it, and as well as collected anonymous questionnaires that will show us qualitatively how well they felt using, or how good they felt using the devices, and if they could really tell the difference, and if they found that these devices that we printed would be suitable if they were in a pinch or if they needed to use a surgical device on, I guess, a remote location or an alien planet, very long term. So once we collected the results, we actually put them into a custom-made MATLAB program and we just kind of graphed them out, discussed them amongst ourselves, and then we collected the questionnaires and applied the questionnaires and the results from the qualitative data to what we got numerically, just to see if they correlate, add up, make sense. So what we've actually found was that, so what we have here is actually, these are just 4 examples. We have a lot more surgical tools, but these are 4 examples just from a wider range. So some of the longest it took to print. So it's one of the longest, I'm pretty sure that the sponge stick was the longest device that took to print. It took about 10 hours to print the whole thing, which is, it's not a really complicated device, but the materials took a long time to print. And one of the shortest things to print was a scalpel handle. There was actually another device that took, I think, one of the forceps took about just 30 minutes to print. So that is actually a factor of consideration, because when we're on the International Space Station and somebody's bleeding out or something, we don't have tons of time to start printing out devices, and we might need something right away. That being said, though, we did also calculate the time that it took to perform various tasks, given the control instruments, which are the stainless steel instruments that we had at the beginning of the experiment, as well as the 3D printed instruments. And in many cases, we found that there wasn't much of a difference. And in a few cases, we actually found that the 3D instruments were a little bit faster. So that's a little bit of a point of pride that we were able to perform these surgical practices a little quicker with our 3D devices, which isn't saying too much. It's just saying that in a pinch and like in a situation where we absolutely need surgical devices printed out, it's not going to make too much of a difference what materials we're using, so long as they don't explode in space. These are results from our pressure tests. I won't get into the nitty-gritty about it, but essentially it was saying that we are actually able to withstand quite a considerable amount of pressure. The thing is with the stainless steel is that when we apply pressure to that as well, it actually warps the material, especially in very volatile conditions, to the point where they're unusable after like roughly the same point as a plastic breaks on our 3D materials. So in the end of the day, it's not too different that way either, which was actually kind of an interesting finding that we're actually going to look into a little bit more. And this is a sample from a qualitative data collection, whereas we have, I guess, from a range of strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. We have the doctors rate their ability to use these devices during their exercises. Now, for the smooth forceps, which was one of the things that took one of the shorter times to print, all across the board, they said that they agree that this will do just fine in a situation where they had like no other alternatives. It kind of ranges depending on the, I guess, practice on the device as well as the actual exercise. But overall, we found that the surgeons found that the surgical devices that we 3D printed were more than suitable for the practices that they were doing. So it actually worked out pretty well. And then at the end of the day, we actually expected them to have complaints or issues about, you know, the lightness, the weight of it, because again, it is like an extension of themselves. So they're used to using stainless steel. They're used to using whatever they used in medical school. But given the lighter materials, they were actually able to utilize them to a high degree and actually, you know, be an expert at their tasks once again after just a little bit of readjusting to the new materials. So I guess in a more broad sense, my picture's cut off a little bit more. There's another company called 3D Like Me, which is a company that we partner with that is focusing more on Earth-based 3D printing. Now, this is a design that they've done, and they recently, debuted this at a TEDx conference, I believe in Ottawa. And of course, it's a 3D prosthetic. This entire thing actually costs about $14 in terms of raw materials. So I thought that was really cool because that somebody having the ability to walk again for $14 is, you know, pretty big deal. And very recently, as actually January 9th, we'd actually never sent up these surgical devices to the International Space Station. But my boss, Julie Lynn Wong, over there, my supervisor, as you can see, that's a CAD of a suitor that she's or a stent, sorry, that she's designed for the National Space Station. And on January 9th, we actually printed out the first medical device to be used on the National Space Station, which was just a simple finger stent. It's actually a very common injury on the International Space Station that left untreated actually causes irreparable damage when the astronauts come back on Earth. So that was a great success and a lot of good press, but we're still working hard on a lot of other things. My research primarily is going to be on the material sciences and making sure that the things that we print on Earth can be printed on space without any actual degradation or adverse effects. That's about it, I think. Let me just double check. Told myself to slow down. Cool, cool, cool. And yeah. Any questions? Any questions at all, or you were first, Miss? Sorry, Professor. How you doing? Hello again. Thank you.
I'm curious because the advantage of 3D printing is that you can custom print things that you might not stock otherwise, right?
Right.
In this case, so like the splint might be different size for different people. But what's the real rationale behind the surgical instruments then when if there's a surgery, you know 100% that you will need a set of forceps, scalpel handles, and you need a whole set of them as well. So that's on the order of, hours and hours and hours to build the whole set. What would be the real advantage there then of printing those?
So when I first, I guess, jumped on this project, which was actually kind of like halfway into their research, I had to really I have not a very strong biology background, so I had to learn about like all the things that are required to perform a surgery properly. And the range of tools, while like there are like the quintessentials that most of which we printed out, there are hundreds of different tools that could be used in the surgical room that they all have on demand that we may not be able to send up right away. But one of the things that they told me about like printing out the quintessential, like printing out about 12 devices at a time, is that that material, if treated properly, is now reusable for future, I guess, prints if need be. Like, God forbid, we need to do multiple surgeries over time, and we only have a certain amount of sterile material, then we can now reuse that material to print out more and more tools if need be. And that being said, not just for surgical applications, but for a wide range of applications when it comes to printing parts and repair parts and tools on the International Space Station or any future space stations, the materials can be reused in the sense that we can have a bulk of material that we can now use to print out all sorts of different tools, parts, replacements, etc. Whereas instead of just sending up a ton of surgical supplies and then a ton of repair parts and a ton of tools. So there are some advantages and there are some, I guess, like inconsistencies with that as well, because there are the tools that you will always need. It's just kind of thinking long term in terms of what is the best way to be the most efficient spacefaring travelers and doctors we can be, if that makes sense. Not that we're sending up exclusively doctors, but no. Yeah, sorry. I guess both of you, I don't know. One of you. Rock, paper, scissors for it.
You brought up the you said it. Can you comment on the sterilization difference between the stainless steel versus the plastic?
So to be frank, stainless steel is by and far the better option when it comes to sterilization. The plastics itself were used, I don't think I mentioned it, but we did not use these 3D printed devices on human beings. We use them on like cadavers, I think chickens, dead chickens, and other medical models that we also 3D printed. But when it comes to, I guess, the sterilization, that's one of our more future focuses on the research. We need to now go into what is the most sterile material, what is the safest material to use, what is the least volatile material in the conditions of space, because photonic radiation changes a lot of the material. Yeah, sorry, Anderson. Yeah.
So let's say you're printing exclusively ABS.
Yeah.
Whatever you plan to print, you need to bring at least the same amount of mass of ABS, right? Plus the printer. So have you consulted with a space agency on the optimal amount of material that you need to bring?
Have we talked to the International Space Station?
I don't know. Have you thought about the
best
amount of?
So I'm just trying to do some math in my head. So if it's 0. So we haven't actually talked to the International Space Station about anything like that. This particular project, I should clarify, I wasn't a part of. She did that basically on her own. And she got a lot of specifications about the materials and the conditions of the International Space Station for that particular project. When it comes to our, I guess, larger scale surgical tools, I'm not entirely sure how much they will need or if they will need any at all. But when it comes to sprint, again, ABS is probably not going to be the exclusive material that we send up, just because we're not 100% sure if it's the best material to send up for surgical devices or for surgical tools. It might not be the best for sterilization. I know it's pretty good, but it's not the best. You will need to send up, I guess, a proportionate amount of mass. Again, it goes back to reprinting and using the same material to print out new devices if need be, and just being as efficient as possible with our supplies that we have. Yeah. Sorry again. Okay, sure. All right. Got all day.
I noticed that you mentioned that you printed out scalpel handles, but not the scalpel knives themselves.
Yeah, that's another thing. So again, I don't advocate for sending up razors and metals to space, but when it comes to I guess actually making the incisions, so I've learned there's not really too much of a substitute for metal. As sharp as you can make plastic, it just will actually slow down the process so dramatically that we can only make the scalpel handle without actually just being completely inefficient. We can make sharp plastics, but it just wouldn't be the same. And we don't know how sterile it will be, because that is actually the device or the object that's going into your skin. So yeah, the scalpel handle is the best we can do in terms of that. But when it comes to actually printing out the scalpel, we'd need to use actual metal materials, or just bring up the scalpels themselves. You might need to bring them in a nice bag or something. I don't know. Space, right? Sir.
Are there any problems doing the 3D printing in zero gravity? Doesn't the powder go floating around?
Yeah, so I've actually because this was super exciting when I went in and she was discussing this, and she's done a couple talks about this, and the microgravity actually creates a lot of issues in terms of the printing itself. Now we're using an FDM for all of our other projects. Sorry, I don't know where my thing is. So for all of our other surgical devices, we're using FDM, which is fused deposition additive manufacturing. Which essentially, I guess, as I was saying, it heats the materials and then places them in a 3D fashion. Whereas this one uses a completely new 3D printer that they've actually just sent up. It wasn't our company; it was another company in Massachusetts, and I forget the name of it. So it's actually called Made in Space. And it's the first off-Earth 3D printer, and it's a new project that they're working on collaboratively with the International Space Station, which my boss was able to get in on and then start printing out some interesting things like that. So this is the first medical device, but that company itself is probably printing out tools like, I guess, common repair tools and other parts that may be needed just for testing. And they sent that up actually in 2014. So as far as that is concerned, I'm not sure yet until they release all their data or information on that, or their findings on that, because it's still an ongoing project. But I know that they're currently collecting a lot of information on that as well. So yeah.
By the way, we only have time for one more question.
Okay, better be a good one. It's the best question in the world. Yeah.
You said that for trial you give doctors this instrument.
Yeah.
So they were not pre-trained for them.
Sorry?
They were not pre-trained for using them.
Yeah, so we didn't actually give them any sort of we just said, here are the stainless steel instruments, do this activity, and they did the activity. And then we said, here are some new materials, do this activity and tell us how you feel about it.
So is it possible that, does it need a special training? If special training is provided for using this kind of materials, can it be more efficient? Thought on it or something? I don't know.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the
Have
question.
you thought on introducing a special training for using the equipments which you are printing?
More than surgery school, or medical
Using
school,
the
or?
tools.
Okay, sorry, the tools specifically. Yeah, well, actually, from our findings, we found that actually, when it comes to actually performing the tasks, the times that it took to perform the task didn't range too dramatically between the stainless steel materials and the 3D printing materials. We could train them to use these ones better, but it probably wouldn't make too much of a difference because they're actually performing just as well as they would with any other tools otherwise. So it could make a difference, and we never know, and in future study we might find that 3D printed materials could be just dramatically better. But as far as it is right now, we just wanted to make sure that we can make something that is as good as they are used to for their device, or for their medical practice. So yeah, does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I understood it properly. All right, cool, awesome. So yeah, I just wanted to actually get our acknowledgements because you got to do that. So I just wanted to thank, of course, my supervisor, Julian Lan Wong, our research, I guess, not assistant, but research facilitator, Andreas Fennel, and all the other people involved in 3D4MD. And yeah, cool. Definitely look us up. We're doing some pretty interesting stuff, and it might interest you to take a look. So yeah, cool.